When we are in the frequency of veneration, we're in a state of being of awe and gratitude, and we're incredibly expanded and connected. Join us today to be enraptured by veneration as we contemplate Gene Key 32 and the corresponding Sabian symbols, Libra 22 through 27. Welcome to the Free to Be Free portal. I'm Julia Ananda, your host, and I'm here with Gene Keys guide Margaret Miller. Margaret, it's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, it is a pleasure to be here with you as well. And just feeling into this beautiful intro that you did and the energy of veneration that is clearly, enlivening your being right now is really beautiful. So thank you for starting it with such energy. And just want to, in feeling into that, what is veneration? And veneration is this knowingness and this incredible relaxation into life. Any of the cities, right? This cities, I think Richard Rudd was describing them as like a rare perfume that begins to just permeate everything. And veneration then is this state of being or this frequency where we know that all of life is sacred and that we are in this love and enjoyment and appreciation of life and of beauty and of love, and knowing that that is what is important, and our own individuality has melted away, and we recognize that even as we are just this little speck, this infinitesimal speck in the grand scheme of things, that we're no more or less important than anyone or anything else. And so, you know, I think the Siddhic states, sometimes they're so hard to describe in words because they're beyond it. They're beyond description. They're beyond words. That frequency has to be experienced. And we touch on these frequencies many times, like in our lives. So it's not like, even I used to think, really recently, I used to think that they were beyond our grasp somehow. But the deeper I contemplate into the gene keys, the more I realize that we all can touch these states, and it may take a huge amount of discipline and a huge amount of devotion, another city, right? Another Siddhic state, devotion, to maintain that frequency, to be able to be in that state over the long term. And so looking at this gene key, it moves from the shadow, gene key 32 moves from the shadow of failure to the gift of preservation, and then to the city of veneration. And so in that triad, right, in that there's this, it seems like a gradient, right, moving from failure to veneration. And that is true on one level, but on another level, the shadow always contains the city, and the city always is an expression of the shadow that has been purified, that has moved from that, on that gradient, from fear to love, right? And so right in the middle is this idea of preservation. So we're sort of going backwards with this today, which is wonderful. I love, let's change it up. So what is preservation then? Preservation is finding out what is worth keeping, what is worth preserving in our lives, in our own personal lives, but also in the collective. Like what is worth preserving and what needs to be let go of. And we can't really determine that if we are still in the frequency of fear. We have to have moved out of that, at least at a for the majority of our time and our beings. We have to have moved out of that frequency of fear, the fear of failure, right? The fear of basically the fear of failure is the fear of death, the fear of failing to survive, right? Or the fear of um, being ostracized or left out in the cold, like, not being accepted by the community is a failure that, in previous times and maybe in some ways even now that could cause us to fail, that ultimate failure of not surviving, right? And but mostly in our culture today, that measure of failure and success, because if you have failure, then you also have success. Well, what is failure and what is success? Well, we have mostly based that on our valuation of money, right? What we can tell uh, if somebody is failing or succeeding by how they're doing, in a financial sense, or in, which is clearly an illusion, because that really does not have anything to do with success. If we look at the big picture and we look at from that frequency of veneration, where everyone is valued and everything is valued and all of life is venerated, right? All of life is appreciated. Then that's not a valid measure of failure and success. And so when we look, I'm going to sort of just dance between these, I guess. When we look at failure, if you look at failure in from a personal sense, oftentimes it will have to do with a failure at a job, getting fired from a job, or not doing well, or having a business fail, or failing on an exam, a test, right? I failed that exam. And looking at that from a victim stance. Then the victim stance can include I'm not good enough, right? That can be, you can make yourself a victim of your own self, right? I'm not good enough. I can't I don't do as well as other people. I don't. And that comparison and that sort of victimization causes us to personalize that failure. And where from another perspective, if we're coming from the gift frequency of preservation, we might look at that very same failure of a business or a job, losing a job, or a relationship didn't work out, or whatever it is, whatever the failure is. And we might, from that place, say, oh, well, that attempt failed. So now, what can I gather from that? What can I learn? What are the juicy parts that I can bring out of that failure and bring it into the next attempt or the next iteration? And what do I want to keep out of that? And what do I want to let go of? Right? What worked and what didn't is sort of a simple way of looking at that. But also, this preservation, to really be in the gift of preservation, we have to have moved beyond the personal identity at some point, at some level, right? We have to have now be thinking in terms of how can I be of the greatest service? And this is always how we can, a really beautiful way to move out of the shadow frequencies is to ask that question, right? In the Gene Keys, we they call it the Grail question, right? How can I be of the greatest service to the whole? And so that, coming out of the frequency of victimization, of sort of wallowing in our failure, and saying, okay, so what can I do now that might be a positive contribution to somebody else, to something outside of myself? How can I shift the focus from this perceived failure onto being of service in some way? And almost immediately, we'll find that we begin to see what is really valuable and what is worth preserving and what we can do without. And it's not about doing without, but in some cases, maybe it is. Maybe the things that we were going for or the things that we were measuring our failure or success by were false, weren't actually true in our own soul, at the core of our own beings. And so we can then begin to see how preservation of the correct things in our lives, the attention focused on that, causes us to be moving towards that veneration. Because what is really important? What is the true beauty in my life? What is the true, where is love really wanting to flow? And I like this idea of preservation also as, you know, we recently were talking about resourcefulness, and so preservation, has to do with our lineage and our ancestry, but it also has to do, and so do our resources, right? Because our resourcefulness and our resources are tied into where we came from and who we came from, and the thought forms that we came from, the belief systems and so forth. And so this preservation is this weeding through and really singling out the parts that need to be preserved, that are worth preserving, like the root stock. Richard Rudd talks about this in this gene key, in the contemplation of this gene key, as you grow the strongest plants from grafting a new bud onto an established root stock, right? So those roots, like the strong roots, are really important, and they're worth preserving. Those qualities are worth preserving. There's always value in having the example of the original teaching, recognizing that it can grow and expand and morph into something new without destroying that original rootstock, right? That can grow and be preserved and passed on to the next generation in a form that will be valuable, right? And so I like to really also look at that idea of failure. We have most of us have ancestors that, some of them had great failures, and their lives may have seemed like great failures, and some of them may have had great success, right? And all of that is relative, but we can choose, even if we don't know, like, the story of all of our ancestors, we contain it in our DNA, in our makeup. We contain that, and in the collective consciousness, we contain that. And so our job in that gift frequency, and then moving into the higher frequency of veneration, is to focus our attention and our energy on that which is worth preserving. And while we're still in this system that values money, that includes things like, and I just kind of want to make it practical, that includes things like what are you spending your money on? If, what are you spending your money on? Some of us, maybe it's all going to just to our, our dwelling and our food, and that's pretty much it. That's where it goes. But if there's this flow of abundance coming in and going out, where are we spending our money? And does our giving over of that expression of energy through the dollar, what is it serving and what is it feeding? And to really look at what we want to preserve and what we want to let go of. To me, it's just, it comes into the idea of, are you going to go to the chain grocery store and buy your vegetables? Or are you going to go to the local grower, the local farmer, right? And where are we contributing our funds to, our energy, and what are we preserving and what are we venerating, right? So I guess I want to stop there for a moment and take a look at these Sabian symbols and see how we can weave them in. So Libra 22 is our first one. And this is a child giving birds a drink at a fountain. And so it's a beautiful symbol talking about the concern of the youth, or this simple being, for the welfare and happiness of these other beings, right? Different beings. And so you feel that sort of natural veneration of the little child giving the water to the birds, right? And so I thought that was just a beautiful statement for preservation, preserving the life of these birds through giving them water, and veneration. Then Libra 23, a rooster calls in the sunrise or salutes the sunrise. So this is like that expression of joy, the veneration of life, right? Like the rooster is calling out, woohoo, it's a new day. And really I think about that sometimes, and I think that that's a beautiful way to wake up, right? I mean, some people don't like to be woken up by roosters, but if we woke up as a rooster and called out, or any kind of bird, and sang out to the new day, we would be saying, whatever the failures were, whatever the difficulties were of the past day, they're behind us now. Today's a new day, and we can move forward and continue that process of discerning what is valuable and what needs to be preserved and where we want to spend our attention, our energy, and so forth. So I love that one as well. Libra 24, a butterfly with a third wing on its left side. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one, but it's talking about this ability to develop and strengthen new responses, new ways of responding, new ways of being. And what may seem like a failure, you know, a genetic failure perhaps, may turn out to be this incredible gift, right? And who knows, 1,000 generations down the road, all of the butterflies have a third wing for some reason. You don't know. We don't know that, right? You don't know until it's over, whether it was a success or a failure. Then Libra 25, I've heard this a couple of different ways, but the information is conveyed through the symbol of an autumn leaf. I've also heard this called the sight of an autumn leaf brings a young boy into a new understanding of life, right? A falling leaf shows him something about life, right? And I thought it's a beautiful symbol as well, um, because the trees, especially our deciduous trees, they, as they are in full leaf and flower, in the spring and the summer, and they're absorbing all of the solar energy through those leaves. But then the autumn comes and the sunlight changes and they get the signal and they start preserving. They start removing the energy from those leaves and bringing it back down into the trunk and back down into the roots for the preservation of the entire tree. So they lose the leaves, they let go of what's not necessary in the wintertime because the leaves aren't going to survive anyway. And if they did, they might actually be threatening the life of the whole tree. And so, what a beautiful symbol for this preservation of what's important, right? And knowing that in the cycle that those leaves will come back, right? That the spring comes again. Then Libra 26, an eagle and a large white dove change into each other. And this has to do, if you can imagine, like they're flying and one turns into the other and they turn into each other and they change into each other. And this is like this expression of the interaction of the spiritual will and love coming together and turning one into the other when a crisis arrives or when they're required. Sometimes the spiritual will is required more than the divine love. And, it's just they turn back and forth into each other. I haven't quite figured out how to weave that in, except for that it's just such a beautiful symbol where well, consciousness is operating in that symbol beyond duality. It's not success or failure. It's not one or the other. It's this changing back and forth uh, of these higher frequencies helping us to move out of that dualistic mindset. So then Libra 27, an airplane sails high in the clear sky. And this then is looking at being able to rise above, to come into these higher frequencies and to see from that perspective, like that perspective of veneration where we know we can see if we can see from the bird's eye view or the airplane's view, we see that all of it is beautiful. The whole landscape and everything on it is beautiful and all of it is sacred, right? So it's getting that higher perspective and being able to um, rise above the personal pressures and the personal failures and bring ourselves into that higher awareness. So those are the Sabian symbols. And I'm just wondering what you're feeling, Julia, or what you have to
Yeah. Well,
say.
I love actually the first symbol of the child giving the birds a drink at the water fountain. And you mentioned that this sort of childlike innocence had this natural veneration for the beauty of, the other beings. And
Yes.
I find that in nature. I find that in looking at every fall leaf. I find it in looking at every bloom of a flower. I love looking at the intricacies of each individual flower. It does bring me into the state of veneration for all of life. And it lifts me up. And I think whatever we can do in our daily lives, instead of just walking past a flowering tree, right? But looking at with awe of how many little pieces and the perfection and the patterns and the beauty of it.
Yeah.
But it lifts us, it lifts our state of being into that awe of veneration of all of life, and it changes the way we see everything.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. That's exactly it. And so these are not, that's not beyond our reach. This is something that we were talking about before we started recording this, is that the veneration of the wisdom of the indigenous people of this world, all of the indigenous nations of this world have at their core this incredible wisdom and veneration of the natural world. And our place in that is not above. It's, that we are part of that whole. And of course, why would we want to destroy or minimalize any of the other beings on this planet? And so, that's they always give us an incredible perspective on what's truly important, I believe.
Yeah. Margaret, thank you for bringing us into the highest aspects of these energies that the sun is shining on right now.
You're
Thank you
so
so
welcome.
much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, so to our audience, if you loved this topic and this contemplation, please let us know in the comments and please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.